everyone. Welcome to my session on identifying and avoiding burnout. I am Trevor Pott, and this session will contain an awful lot of cat pictures. So, who am I? Uh, I am a nerd. I mostly spend my time translating between dialects spoken by different nerd tribes. Um, I am not a doctor or a psychologist or a social scientist or any of the formally trained professions that probably should be talking about things like burnout and depression. I am instead someone who has gone through burnout, depression, and a few related items multiple times, and have had to learn a few things, not only about making it through it myself, but helping others through it. What is the current state of science when it comes to burnout? That's a big question mark. There's an awful lot of research that's going into this, that has been going into this, in part because burnout is what we would call a stress related affective disorder. So you can have burnout, depression, exhaustion, anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder, and so forth. There are a number of different uh, conditions that cluster here, some of which overlap. Symptoms are similar, some of the treatments are similar, some of them are not. And there is, pretty much no way that without an awful lot of training, you would be able to pull apart which is specifically which. Um, but even, the best trained and most knowledgeable academics in the field spend an awful lot of time debating and arguing about this. This is definitely not a field of settled science. That being said, despite the lack of scientific consensus on the specific details of most of this stuff, um, there is a lot that we know and can do uh, within a workplace to prevent and combat burnout. This is where I have to have a bit of a conversation with you about sort of the difference between exhaustion, burnout, and depression, which are sort of the three things that most commonly get conflated. Um, so I want to dwell a bit on how the term burnout has evolved in the popular consciousness over the years. Traditionally, burnout has referred exclusively to work related problems, especially in professions that involve caring for others. So, for example, doctors, nurses, long term caregivers. We're certainly today seeing some of why burnout occurs in those professions. But burnout has generally, uh, the traditional version of burnout has been a combination of high levels of empathy and personal commitment to the work are what made people vulnerable to burnout. Those and that's a thing that is going to be important going through this as we talk about this. Today, the term burnout has been overused. It's popularly used as a catch-all for everything from ennui to emotional dysregulation. Um, and even if you get past the sort of more popular characteristics of what burnout is, there is a debate about whether burnout is the result of all of the cumulative stress that a person encounters in their life, or whether it is, very specifically the result of work or work-like stress. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to be focusing more on the latter. In the traditional definition of burnout, the causative factor is explicitly repeated exposure to the same stressors in an environment of strong emotional engagement. In other words, you care a lot about something that you do regularly, but something that you care about in that environment is stressing you out. The most commonly associated with work and caregiving, but it could reasonably be any stressor that you are repeatedly exposed to in an environment that you care deeply about. So, why does all of this matter? Why care about the nomenclature? And the reason is because burnout, specifically caused by work or work-like environments, is something that we can take action on. It's actionable. We can target the stressors in the high emotional engagement environments, and hypothetically, at least, we can defeat burnout. Um, what is important to also mention here is that the model of cumulative stress results in burnout or something burnout like is not invalid. Um, in the traditional model for burnout, unrelated stressors do exacerbate the burnout you feel, meaning that your burnout may be caused by something, for example, at work, and it's caused by something at work because you're passionately, emotionally invested in your work. But the 10,000 other things that annoy you throughout the day and cause you stress make it worse. Um, and so I guess for the purposes of this discussion, I really do want to focus on burnout's positive factor being uh, repeated exposure to the same stressors in that environment of high emotional engagement. And we'll get to why that really matters here. So one of the things that I really want to focus on, and before we dive into any of the details here, is the myth of burnout being weakness. That you burn out because you're personally weak, because you're unable to shoulder the load, because of any of a dozen different things that basically boil down to, well, if you were you know a real man or a real woman, you'd just be able to tough it out. That isn't true. Burnout happens to everyone, to anyone. It can happen to you tomorrow. It really depends on uh, what you care about more than anything. What do you become emotionally invested in, and uh, how do you feel that your input, your expertise, your knowledge is being perceived and appreciated, and so forth. Burnout is a workplace problem. As previously stated, burnout can occur in other contexts, but predominantly burnout occurs in the workplace. And the characteristics that are going to lead us to burnout in the workplace usually are the kinds of things you would expect. You are being fed some unrealistic expectations. You don't feel like you're being heard. Your concept of risk, the concept of risk of other people around you is not the same. Maybe your boss is not the best person, and that's really grinding on you. Um, but again, the sort of the personal characteristics that are really going to make you extremely vulnerable to burnout, or that you care about whatever it is you're doing, that you become emotionally invested in it, and typically the result of a bunch of stress when you are emotionally invested in something is you push yourself harder, especially as a result of how our society tends to push us towards the belief that if you just work harder, you will succeed, and that the only barrier to success is how hard you work. So when we see something going off the rails and we care about it, we push ourselves. That is the recipe for burnout. Or certainly the most common one. But the other one that I want to bring up and definitely bring our attention to is working without a sense of purpose. I say this because people can burn out without having a stressful environment. It seems counterintuitive based on everything I've just said, but um, if you care about what you're doing, where you think that what you're doing is important, and yet there's no sense of purpose, there's no challenge, there's no way that you can see that you personally can contribute, can move it forward, can, make the world a better place, depending on what your ideology is. uh, that lack of a sense of purpose can and does lead to burnout just as much as any, you know, my boss is a pain in the butt kind of stress. Now, all of that being said, and again, this is, perhaps more a concatenation of caveats than a really focused talk. Uh, Precarity is hell. And if your employees are experiencing precarity, they will eventually burn out. So, what is precarity? Precarity is not being sure if you'll be able to make the rent, not being, having to choose between uh, buying food or buying basic birthday presents for your kids, right? It's that feeling that you're always one missed paycheck away from disaster. Um, that's precarity. And, it gets darker from there. The more precarity that you feel, the more likely you are to succumb to burnout. Um, and this is sort of why you will see burnout in a wide range of different jobs. Say, let's look at, for example, information security. A lot of people who get into information security burn out because they actually care passionately about what they're doing. But information security is the ultimate job in which you scream into the void and nobody listens until it's too late. Everything blows up, goes sideways, and then you have to work your butt off for something that could have been prevented if they just listened to you in the first place. That's a recipe for burnout. But similarly, if you have somebody who is always that one paycheck away from disaster, and they may not care much about their job, but all it takes then, if they are so vulnerable and so stressed out to start with, all it takes is one thing that they do actually care about at their job to really go sideways, and that can trigger burnout. So one of the things, perhaps one of the biggest things that we can do to help those around us prevent burnout or recover from burnout is identify if they are feeling any level of precarity and see if we can help alleviate that. So, we've talked a lot here about different kinds of triggers for burnout, how burnout can affect all sorts of different people. And this means that in the real world, um, there is no single recipe, there is no single solution to solving burnout. It is not as simple as do this or buy this or implement this and burnout will be done. Which means that, especially in diverse environments, you're going to have to put the work in to identify what the problems are with your individual team members, and do the hard work of figuring out how to help them. Now, this is not in any way, shape, or form an advertisement for a less diverse workplace, or a less diverse team. Diversity of thought is basically critical to success, and the past umpteen decades of research into how to succeed at business have really taught us the importance of diversity of thought. But of course, when you build a diverse team, everybody is different. And thus, the leadership model that we engage in when we are attempting to work side by side with our coworkers or lead a team is, it must by necessity be one of helping people as opposed to a more autocratic command based approach to leadership. Uh, Leadership, to be successful, especially in today's world, has to be closer to servant leadership. It has to be one where your job as a leader is to remove the obstacles from the people you work with, to get to know them, to figure out what they need professionally and personally, to feel like they are making a difference in the world, having a little bit of control over their own lives. Uh, this is how you prevent burnout in the first place, but it's also how you help people come back from it. So, one of the things that I've touched on briefly earlier, but certainly becomes very, very important in terms of how can we realistically affect burnout? How can we make a difference in the prevention of it and the recovery from it? Is the manufacturing of purpose. So, when you don't feel you have a sense of purpose at work, this leads quickly to burnout. Again, because burnout is typically associated with a deep emotional investment and then repeated stressors. And one of the most common repeated stressors in any environment is feeling like you aren't being heard and feeling like you aren't being in control. Now, again, because people are very different, they care about different things, which means uh, manufacturing purpose is going to require empowering everyone around you to improve the things that they care about. And this is both going to actually lead towards you having a better place to work. I mean, you want to work in a better place. We all do. But it will also result in uh, higher productivity for everybody involved because they all get to work in a better place, and more innovation in the products and services that you deliver because you are then empowering people to go forth and focus on the things that they care about and bring their creativity and their passion, which may range from figuring out how to make meetings at your workplace better through to how to really just solve the crap out of that UI problem in that product that you're building. Maybe that's something that somebody's really passionate about. But providing the space for people to engage in those passion projects and supporting them throughout, uh, that is one of the most powerful ways that we can uh, prevent burnout in the first place and ultimately deal with it. Now, a little empathy really does go a lot of way, a long way towards solving these problems. But it's very important to note that solving burnout, at least in the traditional definition of burnout being used here, it does not mean that you eliminate all stress for people. Most people need challenges to overcome. That is part of that needing to feel purpose. Yes, we definitely all do need a little bit of help and a little bit of accommodation sometimes. In some cases, that might be, you know what, you have somebody here who's always a paycheck away from disaster. There's got to be a way to help them get over that hump. Uh, and maybe that's the easiest thing in the world that you can do to ease their burden. In some cases, you can solve the burnout problem by making sure that somebody is able to move to a lower sensory environment, especially for folks with, for example, autism, like myself. Um, we may have weird accommodations. I use earplugs on a regular basis because sometimes it's the sound around me is just too overwhelming. I also periodically put on uh, goggles that dramatically reduce the amount of visual spectrum that I see because, again, it helps to deal with being sensorially overwhelmed. These are really, really small accommodations that don't necessarily impact the people around me, uh, but they can make my day a lot better by dramatically reducing the stress that I have to encounter. And those are just, my particular accommodations. Everybody is going to be a little bit different. This is where we come to that a little empathy goes a long way in that solving burnout, dealing with burnout really starts with getting to know your people and getting to know not just what's bugging them, not just what they're worried about, but what they're passionate about. What do they care about personally, professionally? Uh, Giving them the power to engage in that, giving them the reins, letting them be in the driver's seat for those projects. And this is also just coincidentally how we train new leaders. We give them the space to fail or succeed based upon how they choose to approach things. And in doing so, they will learn. And especially if what the projects are that they're working on are, relatively low risk, relatively low expense, there's certainly no reason not to work with them to see the things that they want done. Um, the end result of this is that you get a business that's more adaptable, more capable of dealing with change, and more likely to surface novel ideas rather than becoming a business that uh, becomes an echo chamber and sort of collapses in on itself. With that, I have achieved all of the parts of this that I sort of wanted to talk about. Here are more cats, and please, if you have any questions or comments, drop them in the room chat. I would also like to point out that there is a um, quiz type thing that will be occurring after this, where you have the opportunity to earn some swag. And I am told that the URL for such will be dropped into the notes. Seems to be a lot of love for the cats. Well, the cats do seem to enjoy being on top of all the computer things. Why not be in the presentation? All right. It doesn't seem that there are any questions. I would like to thank every one of you. Oh, there is a question here. Does the employer have a responsibility to monitor mental health and burnout? Um, Legally, that's going to vary greatly by jurisdiction. Uh, Morally, ethically, that seems to depend upon your ideology. From a practical and pragmatic standpoint, I believe that employers should make monitoring mental health and burnout of the employees a priority because those organizations that maintain a not burnt out workforce retain their employees, retain their best employees, and ultimately are significantly more productive. You don't have to take my word for this. There is plenty of academic research on this. So uh, one might then ask how, and that really boils down to you have to set the culture of your company to encourage your managers, your people managers, to get to know all of their staff and to keep an eye on uh, where they are as people, both professionally and personally. And that takes effort from every single person, people manager in the organization. Right. Well, then I'm going to close it out here. And I hope everybody has an excellent week. Thank you for attending.